All right, today we're going to be changing the clutch on an Rotadairon R-250, and just thought we'd take a minute and show you the steps. Oh, pro tip, buy a Mart hat, you spray these with clear coat, they last a whole season. All right, so the first thing we do is we take the driveline off. We've done that. We take the springs off. We've done that. So we take the springs and the bolts out. We take the driveline and the bolts out. And then we get a puller and we pull this front pressure plate off. So we'll do that now. We pulled that front pressure plate off with a puller. This bearing is smooth. It just rides right on the end of the smooth end of the input shaft on the gearbox. So it just slides right out. Pretty easy. Set that down, get it out of the way for a minute. And this gives us access to the clutch. To remove that clutch, we've got a nut in here. And to remove the nut, we've got to take a puller, what do you call these things? Punch. There you go. And punch out the roll pin that's right here. And then this is a left-handed threaded nut. So if you ever wondered what this access hole in the shroud is for, is so that you can reach in here, turn this. We've got the machine up on jack stand so you can turn the clutch and the rotor shaft real easily. Turn this to where you can line up the roll pin, punch that roll pin out, left-handed threaded nut, and then we'll take the clutch off. All right, we got the roll pin pushed out, we got the left-handed thread nut off, and the clutch just slides right out. It just floats freely on the splines of the input shaft of the gearbox between the two pressure plates until it's pressurized with the spring. That's a little sticky, so I'm gonna grab it and slide it out with this. Okay. And we'll pull that clutch out. Not much clutch left on that one. It slipped quite a bit during operation, and we'll talk about that, why this clutch burned up later. But these clutches, if you torque them at the appropriate setting, they should last years and years and years. There's no reason they need to be burned up like this. So this is an operational error on the operator's issue, on the operator's end. So we'll discuss what happened to this clutch later on. But now that this clutch is out, now's a good opportunity to inspect the pressure plates for any damage or wear, clean this burnt up clutch material out of there. We're gonna vacuum it up, and then we'll use brake clean on all of this material, maybe some emery cloth on it if there's any glazing on the pressure plated material. I see a little rust here that's been sitting for a while. So we're gonna emery cloth these things up, clean them up with brake clean, and then it's another good opportunity to inspect your bearings, make sure the bearings are in good shape, and then we'll start putting it back together. Okay, decided it was easier to clean it up if I took the pressure plates all the way out. So we removed the rear pressure plate. That's pretty easy as well. It just has a smooth bearing, sits right on the back side of the input shaft of the gearbox. Took it out, cleaned it up, inspected it. It's also a good opportunity for you to look at your input shaft seal on your gearbox, make sure it's in good shape and not leaking. So now we're ready to put it back together. Your rear pressure plate just sits right on the input shaft of the gearbox and just slides back just like that. Next step, you put the clutch on. Good clutch, bad clutch. You can probably see the difference. And you can certainly see the difference in the thickness of the clutch material. But we'll talk about that later, what caused that. Okay, good clutch. These are splined. They go on this splined input shaft. Doesn't matter which direction. Make sure that these ribs are facing out away from your machine because there's a gap difference between the back side and the front side. So you just slide that on, line it up on any one of them, and get it on there. Come on. There we go. Now, we put the nut back on, and remember it's a left-handed thread, so it doesn't matter. There's no right or left. I mean, there's no face or no backside. Now, this clutch nut will not tighten up against this clutch. This clutch will actually float a little bit on these splines. All you want to do is tighten it to where it's snug, and then look at the hole in here and line up the roll pin hole with the roll pin hole on your shaft. And we'll do that. Well, we got the rear pressure plate on. We got the new clutch on with the fins facing out. We got the clutch nut on. We got the roll pin in. And this clutch floats freely on the splines here. And it's sandwiched between the rear pressure plate and the front pressure plate. And the springs around the perimeter, that's what applies the pressure to that clutch and transfers the horsepower from your driveline, your PTO shaft, to the front pressure plate. And then the springs push the two together, hold them tight, and that transfers that pressure through this clutch into the input shaft of your gearbox. And so we'll put this on pretty easy, just put it right on here. Hardest part, just getting your fingers in there. Boy. There we go. Oh, I need my rubber mallet. Hang on a second. All right, so the front pressure plate's on. The only thing you got left is to put these bolts on. There's an access hole in the back of the shield here. You can line up the rear pressure plate to where you find a hole. Line up the front pressure plate. Stick the bolt through, and the springs go on the front here. And then you hold the head in the back with a ratchet, and then you torque this nut down according to the specs you find in your manual for your horsepower. And then you put your driveline back on and you're good to go. Now let's talk about what happened to this clutch and why it slipped. These clutches are engineered to where they should never slip under normal operating conditions. They're designed, however, to disengage should the machine run up against a rock or an immovable object that stops the rotor shaft, rather than shear pins that are a pain to repair. These have these clutches in there so that if the rotor shaft stops turning for any reason, this clutch will slip. Well, if you have this torqued appropriately for your horsepower, this clutch should never slip unless you lock it up against something. And when you do lock it up against something, it should draw that horsepower down on the tractor to where you know you've hit something. If you look back and there's blue smoke billowing out of here, you're doing something wrong. Your torque is likely your clutch is likely not torqued appropriately. You've got something locked up in your machine. You're tilling on too hard a ground for this torque rating. Something. So in your manual, you're going to see a page like this, and it'll have your machines and your horsepower and the torque settings. If you follow this, you won't have any problem with your torque settings. Now there's another issue that I'll bring to your attention. That if you've got your torque setting correct, but your drive line for your PTO is down here on the tiller and your PTO is up here on your tractor, that forces that drive line to function at an angle like this, and the U-joints at each end of that drive line, they buckle every time they turn at too high of a rating. So what happens is the PTO is attached to this, and then it's spring loaded, and this front pressure plate will move slightly every time it rotates if your angle is too steep. So now you've got your front pressure plate moving like this, and that'll cause uneven application of torque to that clutch disc, and it'll cause chirping and cause your clutch to slip every time it does this. So I went out to the customer's job to find out why this was going through clutches. They had put it on a larger horsepower tractor, consequently had big ag tires on it, and this machine, it was sitting down in the ground. The PTO shaft was about down to here on the machine side and about 16 inches higher on the tractor side. And it created such an angle of the drive line that it caused that movement in the pressure plate. And that's why this clutch burnt out. So uneven torque specifications, PTO to drive input, shaft differences, and all this stuff's in your manual, and or operating it, too much horsepower, big debris locking up. That's the only reason this clutch should slip. We have machines out there that have run for years without ever having to replace this clutch. So it's a matter of operations and knowing how to operate your machine appropriately. So if you have any questions, give us a buzz, contact us at the information below, and we'll see you next time.